Of course, we continue our conversation this morning, and we had the Minister of Finance, Larry Howard, on just a little while ago, talking about, the issues that we face and giving us basically an update as to what's taking place when we look at the issue of falling oil prices. I do have in my company this morning Mr. Hugh Howard. He is the president of the American Chamber of Commerce, AmCham. Good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Good morning, and thanks a million for having us.
The Minister of Finance basically stated that the economy of Trinidad and Tobago, from where he stands, is in a good place, and we should be able to weather the storm, the issues that we face at this time. From where you stand with AmCham, do you believe that the economy of Trinidad and Tobago is stable? Is the glass half empty, or is it half full, or can we look at it both ways?
All right, in terms of whether or not the economy is stable, I would say yes, it is. That has been the ratings given by the international rating organizations. I don't think it's a question of stability here, as the issue that there have been developments within recent times that impact very, very soundly as to whether or not we can continue to be stable. When we take into consideration that the energy sector, oil and gas, contribute about 40% of GDP, about 55% of government revenue earnings, and about 80% of export earnings. Once you have a diminution in terms of the revenues coming in from that sector, it is time that we must look up and see changes are necessary. What can we do to steady the ship of state? AmCham's position has always been that we just don't look at the negatives, we don't criticize, but what we try to do is to bring into the equation information that would lead us all to take appropriate action so that we do not fall into a recession. We believe that that philosophy of ours must continue because, as the late Martin Luther King Jr. said, our lives begin to end at the day when we become silent about things that really matter.
And I think on that note, Mr. Howard, talking about silence, the communication lines have been opened. The Prime Minister would have addressed the nation 2 weeks ago, and of course we would have had communication, the Minister of Finance addressing Trinidad and Tobago, allowing us or giving us an idea as to what we can expect and what we should do. Now, budget 2014-2015 projected economic growth of 2.5%. Central Bank governor is saying now, well, we're looking at 0.5%. Now that the communication lines have been open, what is the suggestion that can be made or is being made, possibly from AmCham, as to how we move forward to at least attempt to maintain a stable economy going forward?
Well, for several years, we have been hearing about diversification of the economy. Now, AmCham has been saying also for several years, look, it is a question of determining where we have the comparative advantages and ensuring that our people are properly trained, ensuring that productivity becomes a way of life. But we've been hearing, yes, this is going to be done, but nobody wants to bite the bullet, so to speak. So we keep ourselves being saddled with these social programs like CPEP and etc. And at the end of the day, while we say definitely one needs to take care of the vulnerable, but before we determine how we take care of the vulnerable, we must decide who constitutes the vulnerable. And what we have been seeing is, over the years, these programs that were supposed to be a kind of a transitional way of getting into the real economic contribution to the country, that has become now a permanent way of life. AmCham is seriously advocating that now that we are faced with this problem of falling revenue, is an ideal time to sit back, do the proper evaluation, do the proper assessment, and make the necessary changes.
That's important, Mr. Howard. But how do we make that transition, in your opinion?
Okay.
We want to attract more investors. This is a global issue that we're facing here. Our citizens, of course, when we look at what we've been spending, as it's been said, the new normal, we are at a stage where, of course, we experience a very high standard of living in Trinidad and Tobago. So does it start first with the populace, or does it start with the government, or how are we going to marry both and allow us to at least find some sort of way through what we call the possibility of a recession?
I think it's incumbent on all of us, whether it be government, whether it's be labor, whether it's the private sector, whether it's civil society. We all have to work collaboratively. We all have to try to understand that for any country to make progress, you must have entrepreneurship and innovation as a way of life. AmCham recognizes this, and AmCham started the National Youth Productivity Forum for that very purpose, where we target the secondary school children, and we give them some direction in terms of critical thinking, analysis, and entrepreneurship, and so on. That I would love to see spread right through the country. Now, another initiative that AmCham has put on the table, and this was done recently, it's in connection with the same question of these social programs like CPEP. And we're saying a lot of the business people are having difficulties in getting labor. And why? Because if people can go to CPEP and work for 2 hours, when they go to the private sector, they got to work a full day, and the productivity level has to be of a certain standard. So what we are saying is, look, we as AmCham, we are willing to get parties together, that is the government agency that deals with CPEP and so on, and the private sector people, and say, let us take some of these 6,000 odd people who are there in CPEP, bring them into a training program where private companies would say, okay, I can take so many persons, I will give them training, clear understanding that training period is a finite period. You're not going to be there for you and your next 2 or 3 generations. Over a period, whatever that period is, you will be trained, and once you have demonstrated that desire to be part of the productive labor force, the private companies will then give them permanent employment.
Mr. Howard, unfortunately, we do have to wrap up, but one really quick question. We've been here before. We've been warned so many times, along with other smaller countries. The IMF has cautioned. How do we go forward without, at least not making any mistakes and learning from the lessons that we've actually been able to gravitate to for the last couple of years?
Well, this is why we are having this program on Friday, because we believe that, again, you put together the brains and the minds of persons who are knowledgeable and are also willing to do the work. So we have this panel discussion, and it's going to be on the question of the economic outlook for the country. And some of the panelists, to give you an idea as to our thinking, on the government representative, we have the Minister of Trade and Industry, that's Minister Barath. We have Mr. Norman Christie, who is the president of BPTT. We have Maria Ducaran in the financial sector. She is from Royal Bank. And our own Nicholas Galt, who is the director of AmCham and also the chair of the hemispheric body called ACLA, that's the American Chambers of Commerce of Latin America and the Caribbean. And so we exhort people, please attend, where we can have some idea as to how do we take it from there. And there's going to be, as I say, it's a discussion session.
And where does it take place, Mr. Howard, and at what time?
It takes place on Friday. It's a breakfast meeting. It starts at 7:30. It would be at the Radisson Hotel.
Thank you so much, Mr. Howard. Hugh Howard, President of the American Chamber of Commerce. Here's a look at the headlines making news at this time. Prime Minister